A relatively robust market for Brook Lopez and some interesting names to explore with that 2031 pick the Bucks own. We dig into that list coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. You can find me on the Bucks Radio Network. You can find Camille's work as an analyst on the Locked On NBA show and the Technical Foul podcast. And we are joined today by our friend from Brew Hoop, Van Fayaz. We thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. And Van, I guess we'll start with this since you're the guest here, and Camille and I have poured through this many times already in this off season, but we have tried to kind of level set expectations for the off season. Let's remove Giannis from all of it, and that's the kind of domino that everything is going to fall around. But I guess, are we aligned to assume this is going to be a very, very busy off season, not only for the league but for the Bucks as well?
I think it will be probably busier than the last 2 years, certainly.
Than just vet minimums?
Yeah, when they were facing so many concerns with the tax being so close to those aprons. This offseason, they project to have a lot of room under the first apron, ability to use the full taxpayer mid-level exception, $14.1 million. They'll have the biannual exception that they could use, about 5.1. Each of these things, if they were to use more than the taxpayer portion of that mid-level, which is 5.7 million, and or the biannual, that's going to hard cap them in that first apron, which is 195 million. So they have free agent options. They also have, if Damian Lillard is determined to be out, I believe it's through June 15th of next year, which I'm doubtful that they are going to put that out there as something like to be decided on. It has to be an independent doctor says he's likely to be out this long. But if that were to happen, they would get basically another mid-level exception out of that. You get either half of the player's salary or the full mid-level exception, whichever is smaller. And then they have a $7.2 million trade exception. The Bucks didn't make any trades last offseason. They didn't, the offseason before, they weren't making any in July or June. It didn't come until like right before training camp, the Damian Lillard trade. That trade exception, the mid-level exception, which can also be used to acquire players via trade now. It doesn't have to be a free agent. These are things they're going to have to, the trade exception they're going to have to use by next February or else it expires. And you can add a player who's making up to $7 million with that. And then the mid-level you have more options with. You can use on the free agent market. You could use it to re-sign Gary Trent, who doesn't have bird rights. You could divide it up between him and Kevin Porter Jr. Yeah, it's shaping up to be a much more active offseason from a player movement standpoint for the Bucks.
And, you point out the trade exception. Now, this would be more of a sign of, I don't think the offseason went to plan, but you can acquire players during the season with that mid-level exception as well. So you strike out and Gary Trent Jr. moves on, or Kevin Porter Jr. moves on, and you don't have anybody else we still have this thing. You can use that during the season, as we can trade for a player absorbed into that as well. So it's the larger piece of all of this, Camille, is again, we're not trying to, put out the front that, hey, the Bucks have the cap space of the Brooklyn Nets, or they have as many first-round picks as some of these other teams do. So are they in a good spot in that sense? No. But you have a lot more levers that you can pull. And again, it may not have worked out to what you hoped last year on the court, but in many ways, that Kyle Kuzma trade, that's what we may look back at and say, hey, this at least kept you afloat, because it's a pretty dark scenario. If everything else happens, Damian Lillard tears his Achilles, you don't trade Chris, you're a second apron team, and you're once again facing all we can do is veteran minimums, and we have an aging group that's held together now.
Yeah, that would be like if on the Suns somebody got hurt and it's just like that. That is what it is. Like the Milwaukee Bucks could be in a Phoenix Suns type of position this offseason.
Or imagine if a guy in the Suns had a no trade and could veto any deal too.
You know what I'm saying? Like it could be a lot worse for the Bucks. But I know the Kyle Kuzma trade on court, mixed results in his first outing with the team here. Going to need a nice offseason for him to kind of understand what the role is going to be and understanding the best way to put him to succeed. But again, the financial flexibility that it added to this roster we can't talk about that enough, I don't think. And even though John Horst has said the goal was not to do this for, financial reasons, the financial reasons just happen to be a benefit of us making this move because we do think that Kyle Kuzma adds something to this team that we need. And again, a rangy forward is something that on paper, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just for the Bucks to figure out exactly the best way to make it make sense on the court in practice rather than just in theory going forward. And if that's possible with this Bucks team. But again, a summer here where there's a lot of smoke around Giannis and what his future might look like. At least the Bucks can point to this offseason saying like it might not be a splashy offseason, but we can add enough pieces this year to be competitive. And as I've been saying, like just to get this retool together of, hey, going forward, we're going to play with the ball in your hand, Giannis, and we have some pathways to make some action happen.
Yeah, and I want to get Van's thoughts on that because we've certainly shared ours quite a bit these past couple of weeks here. But I do think, John Horst was being truthful when he answered the question that it had nothing to do with the financials and that Chris Middleton trade, in the sense that I believe it wasn't about reducing your tax bill. I do think the impetus was we don't really trust the player that Chris has kind of morphed into because of the injuries and the age the past few years, but also this gives us more flexibility. So I do think it was an honest answer that he gave. And, we talk about Kyle Kuzma. Are we to believe, Van, with the updates that are out there on social media, that maybe the role for him next year is the James Johnson enforcer type now?
Because he's like pumping iron at the gym,
training to be a cage fighter, apparently.
Saying don't leave Giannis. With Kuzma, I was pretty vocal in my writing and on social media about how like this ain't it. I mean, and we saw it in the postseason. I wasn't too surprised. But I think this reminds me a lot. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the Josh Hader trade, which yes. For those who aren't familiar with the Brewers baseball, but essentially the Brewers traded their all-star closer, one of the most dominant closers in the game, for just a couple relief pitchers, one of whom they immediately cut, a pitching prospect who's still around, who might be good, and then an outfielder, speedy outfielder, young guys, right?
Ruiz, yes. Oakland A's legend.
Those two relief pitchers were gone, of course, by the next offseason. The pitching prospect's still there, but they turn around and they flip that outfielder somehow to the A's for...
I can tell you how.
Yeah,
he cost far less.
That's true. But somehow the A's decided they really wanted this like borderline major league ball player who was just really fast and could play center field, so much that they were willing to trade like a relief pitcher. And also they traded their all-star catcher to the Atlanta Braves and didn't take back the Braves' young all-star catcher. That guy went to the Brewers, William Contreras, who's one of the best catchers in the game right now. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, that worked out all right. Like a new GM had come in that offseason, sort of corrected that. I think that's what I'm hoping for will happen with the Kuzma thing.
Is this your way of saying that the Contreras in this deal is AJ Johnson?
I mean, I wasn't thinking about it from that perspective. I was thinking like you go around the other way, because yes, it looks bad on paper. I mean, regardless of what AJ Johnson becomes, the first round pick that they gave up is likely not going to convey. But if you can turn around and take Kuzma, the salary for him, he's due, let's see, 2 more years and about 43 million, 42.7 million. If you can turn him around, package him with, maybe a young guy like an Andre Jackson or AJ Green, And most importantly, I think getting under that second apron this summer, that allows the Bucks to trade both their 2031 pick. It would have been frozen otherwise had they remained over the second apron, wouldn't be able to be traded for a number of years unless they could get under the second apron. And because they won't be under the second apron, they project not to be next year, 2032 is open for a trade. So I know you, Justin, and I have talked about this, and you've said this on the pod. That's probably the most valuable draft asset out there this summer, because when it comes due in 2031, Giannis is going to be 36 years old. Who knows where he is? He may be retired the next year, 2032. Yeah, a year older. Those two picks plus salary, I think can fetch you something pretty good. I don't know if it's like, it's not going to be something like like what the Knicks or someone might pay for, like Kevin Durant, or like what we've seen star trades where it's like 5 first-round picks are going the other way. It might not be someone like that, but probably maybe someone who has a little bit more all-star upside than Kyle Kuzma, someone younger. I have some names in mind for that, but yeah, these are moves that were just not going to be possible had that trade not happened, for better or for worse.
I'm interested to hear those names.
Right.
And as we said, your thoughts on, I wouldn't even say the ever evolving, because there have been no updates. I think that is by choice from everyone involved on the Giannis front here. So we'll get Van's take on that as well coming up after this, as we continue to trudge ahead here through the offseason and get set for a very, very, very busy couple of weeks. So we'll get to that discussion coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends over at Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on to the next one. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Open Phone will let you manage business calls and text from a single app. The shared inbox feature is going to be a game changer, as your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads, so you never miss a customer. Open Phone is offering our listeners 20% off for your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, so let's just get this out of the way. I don't think we're going to get any type of update on what happens with Giannis until the week of the NBA draft, really. And, even then, I don't expect us. Let's say things go nuclear and, the scenario that none of us want, or most, I should say, of us want. I don't expect us to hear from Giannis saying, Milwaukee, thank you, but I've asked the team to trade me. So I think it's going to be pretty quiet for the next month, basically. Do you disagree with any of that, or what's your thought on the whole situation and what the Bucks do?
No, I agree. I think my thoughts are, it's in the best interests of both parties to, whatever the decision is, I think, either way, to keep it quiet for now. Because like you said, I really don't think Giannis would come publicly with anything like that. And I think both sides would want it to stay under wraps. Like, let's say he does want to trade. I don't think either side would want that out there, because it drives down the asking price when a player asks for a trade. Even if it's someone like Giannis, it's going to be maybe a little bit less, but it does also just make the market for him a little bit different. It might make him a little bit harder to get fair value for. Not that you're going to get fair value for someone like that anyway. And on the flip side, I think if he does want to stay, I think it's kind of in the best interest of him and the Bucks to keep that quiet too, because it keeps their intentions under wraps. And this is, I think around, maybe around like fans in the league, there are probably a lot of people expecting the Bucks not to be able to do much this summer, who maybe just don't know the situation they're in. I think within the league, there's probably a lot more recognizance that they can do some of the things we're talking about.
Yeah.
I was at the draft combine a few weeks ago and was walking by, just about to go into the hotel where like some of the media availability was being heard. And I see Kyle Korver is walking outside, of course, former Buck, current assistant GM of the Atlanta Hawks. Some fans out there autograph hunting or something. He goes, Kyle, where do you think Giannis is going to play next year? And, just for everyone to hear, there were no cameras around or microphones. Korver says Milwaukee. So I think they're
could also be protecting himself.
Of course.
Technically tamper here.
Of course. Right. I mean, you never know who's walking around there who could pick something up. But I also think that there are reports coming out, like mostly from just media sources. Like there was one today about like there's mutual interest between Toronto and Giannis, where they kind of defy logic because, well, like why are the Bucks going to want Toronto's first round picks? I don't care that they control them all, which is what people were saying. Like those picks are going to be like at the end of the first round for a number of years. If the Bucks are going to trade them, they're going to be getting like back picks that are good, if not their own picks, which in 2026 through 2029 say somehow, just at least other picks that project to be in the lottery, not from the team that Giannis is going to.
Right.
So yeah, I agree. It seems like we don't really hear these types of things until closer to free agency, around the draft anyway. Like I don't think we heard that Damian Lillard want to leave Portland and go to Miami until like late June a couple years ago. So yeah, I don't think we're going to be hearing anything anytime soon. We might just see just actions, either probably by the Bucks, maybe by other teams too, which just might make it clear to us, like if the Bucks make some sort of move designed to keep them in contention this year and in the years forward, it's like, okay, they seem pretty confident. And I will say that just based on what I saw from Bucks personnel at the combine, they don't seem concerned. I don't know maybe what you guys have observed, and Justin, you're around the team much more than me, but I just get the sense that they feel the same way a lot of fans do, which is like, oh, here we go again, another summer of this. This is not any different than how we usually operate.
Yeah, and I mean, Camille, I think you and I talked about it a little too. I think even if you have concerns, maybe overblowing it, but even if you have that, like, I don't know, does this person feel the same way about me as I do them at this point in the relationship? I don't think you can project that anyway, but I think the bigger thing that we've tried to get across here these past couple of weeks is, yes, I understand that in many ways, especially early on, I think a lot of the feedback that we got from the everydayers and listeners was, boy who cried wolf, that we go through this every year and it's just kind of wish casting Giannis onto other teams. And I can certainly see the logic there. But what I would say is, I know it's happened before. To me, this is the first time where you had to take it seriously and think, okay, there might be something there this time, but also it's not going to go away next summer. Unless Giannis signs an extension, which I don't expect him to do.
He's not even eligible. His extension that he signed 2 years ago literally kicks in this year.
This year, yeah.
So it's not going away next year with that either, as you're moving closer and closer to the, well, now he's getting closer to a walk scenario. So I think this is unfortunately a conversation we are going to have to entertain for the next this offseason, next offseason, maybe even after that as well. But I think the other challenging part is a lot of the national discourse is centered around cash in on the asset and recognize it ain't working. It's time to rebuild and move on if you're the Bucks. And it just takes out so many variables that we've discussed along the way of Giannis's importance to the franchise, to the fan base as a whole, and what he did to really prop up that team. And you could argue in many ways, keep the Bucks in Milwaukee and getting that arena built and everything else. So I don't think the Bucks are ever going to be looking at a scenario where they say, you know what, we had a good run. It's probably time to cash in our Giannis chip here and bring in some draft picks and assets. It just centers around, if he decides I don't see it here and asks for a trade, that's when you do that. And to your point too, Van, about the draft pick capital, the only teams that would make sense are teams that control other teams' draft picks and teams that have draft picks right now, where you could take back a combination of young players and get picks this year too, knowing we don't have those for the next couple of years. So let's get in some young players now and some young players to try to avoid the tank. And we're not single-handedly giving the Pelicans and the Blazers great picks down the road.
Yeah. Really quick, Van, before you respond to that, I do want to just say to your point about both of you making that this is probably going to continue operating in secret to a certain degree. That makes a lot of sense too, given the fact that we're heading into the draft. It's free agency. This is a time of a lot of misinformation as well, of just teams trying to get other teams off the scent of what they're doing. And I did see a report come through today from Rafael Barlow. Shout out to Locked On NBA Big Board, who's pretty tapped in. And he mentioned, like, of course, when you think about the summer of Giannis here that we're having, he said a team that keeps getting brought up, of course, is the Spurs. And it makes a lot of sense given the fact that they have Wemby, plus they have enough draft capital to make this worthwhile for Milwaukee to pull this trigger if Giannis asks out. But he also mentioned the fact that he had a conversation recently with the father of a projected lottery pick who told him that the Bucks have been doing background work on his son, even though the Bucks don't pick until 47. And the dad was just saying, like, they're not even in the top 10, but they keep asking about my son and wanting more information. They've called, and I don't understand the interest unless they're planning to make a move. I'm not saying that to say that based on what Raphael's reporting that something is going to happen. But I think it goes to the point of you have to do your due diligence overall, of just in case this happens, we need to be prepared and do our research here. So I did find that to be interesting, especially just given the fact that there's a lot of different Giannis news around right now. But Raphael is pretty tapped in. So I thought that was interesting that a lottery pick's dad was just kind of like, yeah, I'm surprised the Bucks are calling around.
Let's explore that a little further and get that list of players that Van has, the interesting targets, coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and let's talk about something that doesn't get talked about enough: men's mental health. There's this pressure to always keep it together, to perform, provide, and never show weakness. But the truth is, real strength comes from opening up and taking care of your mental well-being. Every year, 6 million men in the U.S. experience depression, and many go undiagnosed. But talking to someone, a friend, a loved one, or a therapist can make a huge difference. Therapy isn't just for crisis moments. It's great for learning how to set boundaries, build healthy coping tools, and be the best version of yourself. With over 35,000 licensed professionals, BetterHelp makes it easy to find a therapist who understands you. You can connect from anywhere, switch therapists at any time, and fit sessions into your schedule with just a click. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off for their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Yeah, so I think, unless you guys, I think, Camille, you and I talked about it earlier, unless you feel differently, Van, I think a lot of that too is just due diligence of, okay, well, we don't think this is going to happen, but I suppose we at least have to monitor this. So if we did end up with a pick in this range, this is a guy we'd be interested in.
Yeah, I want to say I've heard about the Bucks just working out people outside of their range.
There was a report a couple of weeks ago too of an unnamed player that,
right. But I'll to talk about the Spurs and what you had just mentioned, Camille, prior to this, I mean, you look at where the Spurs are picking. They have the second pick, of course, but they also have Atlanta's pick at 14.
Yep.
And I'm one of the reasons I'm skeptical of the Spurs is because the picks they have available to trade are like, they're not that great. The picks from other teams, I should say. So they've got the Atlanta pick this year. They can do a swap with Atlanta next year. These are all first-round picks I'm talking about. They've got Atlanta's pick in 2027. And then they've got Boston's pick in 2028. And then either Dallas or Minnesota in 2030. I mean, looking at those, like, none of those seem too juicy. Maybe the Boston pick in 2028.
That Boston was interesting to me.
That's the only one I could like look at and be like, all right, that's interesting. Yeah. But it's really the other Texas team that makes, I think, Justin, we were talking about, that makes more sense. Houston is picking at 10. That is the Suns' first-round pick this year. And they also, you want to talk juicy, they've got the Suns' first-round picks in 2027, and they can get the most favorable of Dallas or Phoenix's in 2029.
Which looked great a couple, midway, like March, it looked great, but now it's all your eggs are in the Suns basket.
Well, and I don't think that's such a bad basket right now based on what's going on there. So that is the one that really makes the most sense to me. They, of course, the Rockets could offer some young players too. But that's a good segue into, I think, this list that we're talking about, because I think, in a trade this offseason, certainly, like, you want a younger player, specifically someone who is going to kind of bridge this gap into Giannis's, like, latter half of his career, we'll say.
And to be clear, you're discussing a trade just with that 2031 pick, not a Giannis trade.
No, not a Giannis trade. Thank you. Yeah. But like you kind of are looking for someone like who Middleton was when they acquired, or not when they acquired him, but when, they got the extension. Yeah. When Middleton circa 2026 or no, I'm sorry, 2016 or so. And there are some names out there I like for that, but talking about the salary, one thing that the Bucks gained by being under the first apron, the second apron, I should say, I know I've talked about with you guys, the ability to aggregate salaries, but also, you'd only face a cap at the first apron, again, 195 million, if you aggregate guys and you take back more than you are sending out. And just to put that in perspective a little bit, you can take back in a trade up to 125% of what you're sending out, plus I think $250K. But let's say the Bucks were going to trade Kyle Kuzma and Pat Connaughton's expiring salary. That's about 31.8 million, but you do that multiplier, it's almost 40. So that, you don't have to put that all towards one player, but it gives you a lot of options that you just wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, you look at players by salary, and talking about the Rockets, prior to that first round series, a name that I had liked for a couple of years, or even like last season when I saw the contract extension he got from Houston, was Jalen Green. Now I'm kind of out on him, but
you're not alone.
If we look in the range of guys between 40 and like 20 million or so, there are some interesting guys who I think they could get with one or both of those picks. Of course, one of them would have to be a swap. One name that has come up, just popped into mind today for me, is from the Pelicans, and it's probably not a name that a lot of people are thinking when you think of a young player who the Pelicans could trade, because I'm not talking about Zion Williamson, and I'm also not talking about Herb Jones, who Bucks fans have been wanting for years. And Herb Jones is great, don't get me wrong, but with a new GM down there in New Orleans, it's like there's this report now that anyone's available. So what about Trey Murphy? He is 20, let's see, it'll be 25 in a couple weeks. The big drawback with him is he tore his right labrum and some of his rotator cuff this year. So, and he's had some injury issues before. He's played 57 games the last couple of years, 79 his sophomore year, but he's a 38% shooter from deep. He got over 21 points per game this year. Certainly like the kind of 3-point shooting you want. He's not Herb Jones, but he's got a 6'8", 206-pound body that I think he can play some decent defense. He's someone I would think hard about trading those picks for. Other names, they probably a little bit less likely now, given some of the things that have happened since, like OG Anunoby. The Knicks probably don't want to get rid of him. Kristaps Porzingis makes a lot of sense to me as Giannis, a Brook Lopez replacement next to Giannis. Other than that, maybe I don't know how keen Toronto is on trading him, but because he's from there. But RJ Barrett, who I wouldn't say is the most efficient scorer and doesn't shoot, is more an average shooter, but he's also just going to be 25 this summer. And both he and the benefits with some of these guys is they're locked up. Like Barrett, he's got 2 years and about 7 million left on his deal. Trey Murphy,
Murphy's extended through 29.
He's through 2029, 4 years, 112 million. So these are guys who, if they don't have the contract extension already, the Bucks would have their bird rights. And if you're getting someone in their mid-20s, like 25 to 27 years old, that could carry Giannis, should he want to stay, into like his, age towards the end of his contract, certainly, which is, if he opts out, he would, let's see, in the 2027 season, he'd be about to turn 33 for that year. So at least he can, for the 2 years he has on this extension before a decision would have to be made. And again, he wouldn't be eligible for another extension. I think next year would be the first time he would be. But someone who could bridge this gap between the previous Bucks that we have known and hopefully a new one that can rise to the top of the East.
And the interesting thing with Murphy is, when we mention the changes in the front office in New Orleans and the fact that his extension kicks in this next season, so he goes from 5 million to 25 million. And he is a young player, and he's under, all things considered, if we're talking about, I think that deal maxes out at 31 million, which
31. If
salaries are going to keep going up, even as much as we've talked about the death of the middle class, like that's still a pretty favorable contract if he's producing and giving you two-way play.
Big time.
But if you're changing your front office, maybe they're looking for a different type of player, and maybe they have a different thing in mind that no, this isn't how we want to build the team. So rather than signing up for 5 years of this, let's get out 4 years, whatever, let's get out from this now, that they may be amenable to that. So that is a very interesting name to float out there. There's some more names that we do want to get to. We're pressed for time on this episode. We're going to carry this over to a part 2 to get into some more names to take a look at. Van's thoughts on what we saw from the Pacers in the Eastern Conference, and a name that we talk about quite a bit on this podcast, and that is Brook Lopez, the market for Brook Lopez, the value that he projects to get on his contract. It may surprise a lot of Bucks fans. We'll save that conversation for part 2 on tomorrow's show. Thanks for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board show. Neil already mentioned the name. Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumors. There's already been quite a few leading up to the draft. You can find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. That'll do it for part 1 of this. We'll have more with Van on tomorrow's show. And later in the week, we will catch up with Frank and get his thoughts as well. For Van and Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.